Welcome to the Have More Fun podcast. In this episode, I talk with Leeana Tankersley about how to be a beginner, the ancient idea of beginning again, and how to make love to yourself. Yes, you heard that right.
And then all of a sudden we realize I haven't even taken a breath in 3 days. My shoulders are up to my ears. I might want to think about is this really a great strategy for living? There's a couple people that read early drafts of the book and they were like, you have to take that out. That's so uncomfortable. And I'm like, I don't know. I think, yes, it's uncomfortable a little bit.
There's a famous quote by Annie Dillard that says, "How we spend our days is how we spend our lives." This idea has been hitting home with me lately as I realize that it is in the smallest details that life is really lived. The intentional choice to look someone in the eye as I walk past them on the street. The choice to not rush through packing lunches in the morning and take a moment to be grateful for the 3 kids who I get to pack lunches for. Or the intentional choice to start my morning with peacefulness instead of chaos. The Desert Fathers, a monastic community of mystics in Egypt around the 3rd century, understood this concept and created what they called a rule of life to help guide their daily choices. And the most well-known rule is the Rule of Saint Benedict, written 1,500 years ago, which was created to help his community of monks translate their faith into the habits and rhythms of their shared daily life. The way they understood it was that the rule of life was written by an individual for the purpose of helping them prioritize what was most important to them, so that when they were making choices about how to spend their 24-hour days, their rule of life would provide a steady guide to help get them closer to the life they wanted, rather than feeling like a victim by simply letting life happen to them. And if you're anything like me, the word rule may trigger thoughts of strict or rigid parameters, but that's actually opposite of what a rule of life is intended to be. Esther DeWall, a longtime student of monastic spirituality, writes that our English word rule is derived from the Latin regula. And regula is a feminine noun and it carries a gentle connotation. She says it's more like a signpost or a fortifying guide who offers clues and support in one's search for God. And in this way, a rule of life is different than the goals and intentions and resolutions we typically set for ourselves, right? Those are methods that are task-based and measurable, and they're often focused on what we do. A rule of life, on the other hand, helps you become. It's comprised of several simple statements that guide the posture of your life and the living of your days. Because the most remarkable and sometimes trying fact about daily life is that it's repetitive, which means each day we get the opportunity to try again, to start over, to begin once more, which can be maddening and mundane. Or, if we choose to see it differently, the stuff of miracles. One of my favorite books that I've read this year is called Begin Again by Leeana Tankersley, who also happens to be my guest on this episode. I was lucky enough to get an advance copy of her manuscript, and there was a passage in there that I go back and reread on a regular basis because it reminds me of how to interact with the repetition of life. And this is what she says. "We love the idea of doing things once and for all, but this is not where meaning is found. We don't take communion once and for all. We don't love our spouse once and for all. We don't parent once and for all. We don't do the dishes or the laundry or the vacuuming once and for all. We don't read, endure the commute, or shave our legs once and for all. We return in what turns out to be a sacred connection to the mundane task, to the moment, and then we do it again, over and over again. This is the raw material of our living, and none of it is to be overlooked. This is not insanity or hilarity or nuisance or idiocy. This is a task of humanity, to return, to reinvest, to breathe, to begin again. The focus is on the process, the participation, but not the product, ever." This is the kind of rule of life I want to live. A commitment to return, to reinvest, to focus on the process and not the product, because that is where the most synchronistic things happen, in the repetition of doing the same things over and over, but with a renewed perspective. That making the commute every day or picking up Legos or making dinner is our beautiful life, not something we rush through to get to the good stuff. One of the ways I've been changing my daily practices is through a commitment to a morning routine. And I have to tell you, my free spiritness wrestles ferociously against any type of routine that feels too demanding or unproductive or stringent. But I've picked up one routine that I really enjoy, and that is called the 5-minute journal. And there's a link in the notes for where to find the one I use. But what I love about it is that it's quick and it works to start my morning intentionally, because what I'm learning is that a little intentionality with our daily habits can change our whole life, which is what I appreciate most about my guest today. Leeana Tankersley is reminding us all that one of the greatest gifts we give to ourselves is the freedom to begin again, as many times as we need it. Leeana Tankersley is a speaker and writer who loves chips and salsa, hot pink bougainvilleas, faux fur, and being home with her people. I mentioned earlier that I was lucky enough to get an advanced copy of her newest book titled Begin Again, The Brave Practice of Releasing Hurt and Receiving Rest. And I have to tell you, it is one of the best books I've read in a long time. You definitely want to go to Amazon right now and pre-order it so you can get it immediately when it launches the first week of April. Leeana and I met up at her good friend Elaine Hamilton's house, and you'll hear Elaine join the conversation toward the end of our interview. Elaine runs the Kerr House in San Diego, which is a therapeutic community offering individual, couples, and family counseling and massage. And if you live in San Diego, you definitely need to check it out at soulcarehouse.com. In fact, their tagline is inviting you to a well-tended life, which perfectly sums up Elaine and her sage presence and this conversation with the beautiful and brilliant Leeana Tankersley. Get ready to be inspired to live a well-tended life. Here is my friend, Leeana Tankersley. So I just finished your manuscript and it is beautiful. I was just saying I have it on the corner of my desk because I feel like I need to reference it over and over again when I need a reminder to be kind to myself, or that there is always an opportunity to start over. Like every moment is an opportunity for a new beginning. So beautiful. I can't wait for people to read it. And it launches April 1st? 3rd. April 3rd. I wrote that and then I second guessed myself as I was saying
April 3rd, 2018.
Okay. April 3rd. It's on the shelves. But the heart of Begin Again is this idea that comes from the Rule of St. Benedict. And you're the first person I've ever read this from, and it really revolutionized the way I view things in so many ways. But it's this concept of always we begin again. Tell me a little bit about it.
Yeah, so I became a mother for the first time to boy-girl twins, and that kind of obviously rocked me. You know, I'm learning how to be a mother. I'm beginning as a mother, and I'm doing it in kind of intense circumstances.
Absolutely.
And so I was kind of underwater about a few months in, and I picked up a book, and I read that quote from St. Benedict, always we begin again. And somehow just in those few words, it just said everything. Like, it's okay. You know, we always have an opportunity to begin again. If we're doing wonderfully and we're riding high on life and we're hyper successful, we still have to get up tomorrow and begin again. Mm-hmm. And if we're failing and we're in the weeds and we're underwater, we're always offered an opportunity to begin again. And it just struck me like this is truth. And this is the truth that I need for this season. So that was almost 9 years ago. And what's interesting is that has been one of the single most important, effective companions with me on the journey of motherhood these almost 9 years. And I come back to it. I come back to it because I mean, that's what so much of life is, and certainly what so much of motherhood is, right?
And in those moments when we're experiencing like a tremendous amount of shame or guilt over some little thing that happened, it's such a helpful reminder. Okay, this moment, I have a fresh
exactly
chance to start over.
I'm always being offered a hand to come out of my corner. Mm-hmm. I can stay in my corner. I can stay stuck in shame. I can silence myself. I can I can refuse the grace that's being offered to me, or I can realize this hand is reaching toward me that wants to pull me out of this place where I feel stuck. When I was writing the book, I did some research on the word begin. And as you know, in the beginning of the book, I talk about this. And what I loved, and I did not know this prior, was that the etymology of the word begin means to open or to open up.
Crazy, right?
Right.
Who would have thought?
Right. And I love that because so much of when we feel stuck in shame, it's like we just want to shut down and close off and self-protect. And this idea of beginning again, it's like right in the moment when we want to shut down, we open up and we let someone else in, we let God in, we let grace in. Say, it's okay. I messed up. It's okay. We can begin again.
And we were talking earlier about how the idea of beginning is so sacred, but we live in a culture who is not comfortable with being a beginner at anything, right? Even myself, like, I don't want to be the worst person in a class. Like if I go to a dance class or a painting class or whatever, we have an uncomfortability with being imperfect at something, with not knowing exactly how to be an expert, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
What do you think about how do we move past that idea? Because if beginning's sacred,
right,
then there's something really significant in that for us.
Absolutely. And that's a super counterculture, counterintuitive message, right? I think that what we believe often is that to be a beginner is to be a failure.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we have to change is like, of course we have to start somewhere. When you're a new mother, when you've never had a 2-year-old before, when you've never sent a child off to school, when you've never gone back to school before and you're starting over, it's this opportunity to offer ourselves grace and receive grace from God instead of thinking about this as because I'm beginning, I'm failing. We have to start somewhere. And it also forces us, I believe, to accept our humanity, right? I'm a human being, and I may be super advanced in certain areas of my life, but I'm going to have to be a beginner in some areas of my life. And that requires my need for other people. That highlights my need for other people and my need for God.
Mm-hmm, totally. And I love how you talk in your book about how the monks practice this idea of the holiness of repetition, and how when we embrace this idea of beginning again, it helps us from feeling stuck, from being stuck.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think in my own life, what I realized is, especially in spirituality, we can see it as like, man, I'm getting so good at this. You know, man, I'm really graduating to this next level of enlightenment. And wow, I'm like the Dalai Lama coming through the door,
Totally.
you know?
Yeah.
And I think actually what's more effective is, or either that or like, I'm worthless, I'm hideous, I will never get it. Right? We're either like superhuman in our spirituality one moment, and then we're subhuman in our spirituality the next moment. This idea of repetition keeps us right in the pocket. Like, I'm a human being, right? And so I think repetition is holy because it requires us to open up, like we talked about with that idea, begin. And then I've seen in my own life when I am struggling, exhausted, wishing that my life looked differently, bigger, better, something that it isn't. The idea of tending brings me back. It's healing, chopping onions, watering a garden, coloring with my kids. I have these bougainvillea plants all over. And if you read the book, you see my obsession with bougainvillea, but I have these potted bougainvillea all over our property. And I just go out and water them, even if they don't need it, you know, just as an act of tending, of coming back into myself, and how in about 4 more days, they're going to need water again. And the vegetables are going to need to be chopped again, and the dish is done. And I think there is something that the monks teach us about returning to our work, especially work with our hands, that brings us back to ourselves.
That idea of tending has really changed so many things for me. It's transferred the mundane into something really beautiful and significant and like soul nourishing.
Absolutely. And it's not a throwaway, right?
Totally.
So many of those, they're just chores. They're a throwaway. I've got to get through it so that I can get on to real life. And it's so important to reframe that. What if real life is happening in these moments?
Mm-hmm. You have a concept in the book that really struck me when I turned the page and saw this as the title of a chapter. And it's Scared Sacred. And it's this juxtaposition that you make between them. Talk to me a little bit about that.
I'm a word person. I love words. And I noticed one time I was typing the word scared into my computer, and I transposed the C and the A. And is that right? The C and the A? Yes. Mm-hmm. And if you do that, the word immediately is sacred. And I erased it and wrote the word I meant to write. And then I paused and I thought, isn't that interesting that scared and sacred are so close to each other? And it just became a little metaphor for me of like, often when we are the most scared, especially to step into new territory or to open our lives up or to begin or to be a beginner, and it's so scary, it's a risk, that often we are like inching into sacred ground. And I just remind myself of that, scared sacred, that sometimes when I'm the most afraid, I might be closest to something really sacred in my life.
Totally. Do you have a moment like in the past month where you felt scared?
Oh man, Mandy. Yes. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the work I do is public, and I have to submit this work to people who are going to critique it. And before it even goes out in the world. And it's so scary. It's scary to pour your heart into something and then to hand it to someone and say, here, mark it up, tear it up, tell me what it needs. Not even to mention putting that out into the world and just with your whole heart, hoping that that somehow meets someone where they are and where they need to be touched. And it's so scary every time. Every time it's so scary. And then even as I'm talking about this right now, I have chills because it's sacred. God has given me work to do and an offering to give. And he always reminds me that it's not a performance. It's just an offering. It's just an offering. And so, yeah, you're scared sometimes and it's a risk and it's vulnerable to give your offering. But perhaps as my chills indicate, like I am on sacred ground. And that's where God wants to meet me and where God wants to meet others.
Totally. I think one of the things I love most about you is that you go first. Like this is the work that you have done in order to do your work in the world. And that's why it's so deep and profound and wise, because you have gone first. You've gone before the rest of us. You have treaded in deep water, and you can show the rest of us the way because you've done it. And I think that's why your books and your writing are so unique from so many other things that are out in the world, because you've done the hard work first.
Thank you.
Yeah, so good.
I wrote this book basically in the dark. It's interesting. I mean, I got up and wrote this book at 5 a.m.
Girl.
do you
Are
hear
going
me?
to bed at like 7:30?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm going to bed at like 8.
Oh,
man. Of course I am. Oh, I need like a whole lot of sleep. And I would still take a nap in the afternoon. But it was somehow like, that's when this book, my husband was traveling a ton for work, and that's when this book had to be written. It was at 5 a.m. in the dark. It was the winter, and it was dark, and I would get up and I'd write it in the dark, and it did feel somehow in that way like God was working with me on this material first, and it was for me first, and so I love that, and I hope that does come through. That this is like the very fragile and vulnerable work that God is working on me with, and then I want to share that because I think perhaps that might be relevant.
Absolutely. So I was looking through the manuscript last night, and a line stood out to me that I think will resonate so much with so many people listening, and it's that most of us are borderline desperate for rest. Don't you feel that way? Like my friends, the people I run into in the grocery store, like we all have this chronic low grade, like desperation for a reprieve.
Yeah. The subtitle of the book is The Brave Practice of Releasing Hurt and Receiving Rest.
There's crickets in the
Do we need to
like
turn that
okay.
off? And I think because that's true. I think we are sort of have this restless paralysis about us these days. We're kind of like, we have this glazed look in our eye. There's so many things we want to do and be about, and we don't know where to start. And we're kind of, we're just restless. And I wrote in one of the first chapters something that is profoundly true of me, is I wanted to be at rest and not be asleep. For so much of my life, the only way that I find rest is by going to sleep. And that's an interesting metaphor too.
Totally.
Right? So how can I stay awake and be at rest?
Wow.
And some of that is anxiety has played a role in my life. And so I do feel restless, even just physiologically sometimes. It's going through some trauma of moving overseas with my husband's job and coming back, and 3 little kids really quickly together. And your body holds that, right? And our bodies are holding so much these days. We're exposed to so much trauma and violence all over the world that 10 years ago, were not exposed to. We hold all that. And I think we're all suffering from kind of a low grade restlessness. But what's interesting is often that doesn't translate into activity, although sometimes it does. It's also kind of paralyzing. And that's
Absolutely.
depressing
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
exhausting. And so,
Is that where begin again kind of comes in?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's like I'm running circles around myself. My body's buzzing, but I don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what's one small step I can take in the direction of health and wholeness and tending?
So good. I love that word tending. I know we're coming back to it, man. So useful.
Because I get into these modes where it's like, I got to change my life. I got to start
It is
over. I got
everything
to do
all at once.
Totally.
Right?
I got to go to Paris for a month, and I got to do these
Yeah.
things to totally change my life. And then I realize 5 minutes later how impractical and impossible that is. So then I get even more restless, right? Because I can't figure out how to make myself feel better or my life feel better. And so much of the time, it's about taking one small step in the direction of tending. And if I would just pick up a knife and an onion, 10 minutes later, I might feel a little better.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I light a candle and spend some time coloring with one of my kids, I bet in 10 minutes I'd be breathing better.
Absolutely. So good. So you talk about how we become loyal to the toxic voices in our head and how we feel like in some way it's a monitor or a like it keeps us in check.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the principle in our
yeah,
head, right?
And
Yeah.
it's useful in some way.
Yeah.
So we don't get arrogant or whatever our thing is that we don't want to be.
Mm-hmm.
But yet it's really not serving us well in any way.
Mm-hmm.
How have you dealt with the toxic voices in your head?
I have a very intimate and personal journey with shame and with these toxic voices. Sometimes I call them soul bullies. And sometimes they're so close to me and their voice so recognizable. It's like I don't even question their veracity. I just think it's the truth. You messed up. You're not good enough. Don't you wish you could do it like her over there? It's so subtle and it's such a cliche so much of the time, but unchecked in my head, it's the truest thing about me. And I was having a conversation with God in the dark while writing this book. And I feel like what God was saying to me is, let's go back and look at your relationship with shame and with these toxic voices, because you say you want rid of them. You say you don't want to be listening to them. And yet you are almost like addicted to them. You come back to them as they know the most about you. They know more about you than you know about you, than maybe even God knows about you. Do they know the truest things about you? Or does God?
Wow.
If we think those toxic voices hold the truest things about us, we will listen to them and we will stay connected to them. And there's something in us that feels good, starts to feel good by being put down by them. And what God asked me that morning, and it's like, I still think about this and I come back to it like daily. What if the toxic voices weren't your greatest enemy? What if they were your closest friend? What if you gained something from keeping them close that keeps you small, keeps you from having to be exposed and vulnerable in the world, and can kind of keep you hiding? And what if there's something about that feeling that serves you? And so what would we need to do if these toxic voices were your closest companion? And I think the phrase is that so many of us are serving things that are no longer serving us. And we don't know it until we get really quiet and we let God into that.
How did you take the first steps to hold those voices close and to really analyze them with an open heart, to recognize like, okay, this isn't serving me well?
Yeah, I think often we go through life and we think those voices, like I said, we may even think that's the voice of God, that condemning voice. And what I always say is like, if it's condemnation, it's not from God. God offers conviction. He offers these holy tensions in our lives, these nudges, but putting us down, that's not God. So honestly, it was as simple and as difficult as just realizing there's a voice in my head that I need to like hold out in front of me and look at, and it is not a voice that's serving me. I think just breaking the assumption that this voice is offering me something I need when it's not. Does that make sense?
Totally. It's a very simple awareness.
Yes.
And then there's steps to start becoming aware and beginning again.
Then you
listening
realize,
to different voices.
oh my gosh, now that I recognize the tone of that voice, I know that voice now. And I realize it's visiting me 27 times a day, telling me a bunch of crap that's not true about myself, that's not true about other people, that's not true about who my truest, untouched, God-given, God-image identity. And once I start recognizing the tone of that voice, then I realize like, oh man, I'm listening to that so much more than I thought I was. And sometimes I'll just take it like a legal pad and just start writing down, what is that voice telling me? You look at that on paper and it'll bring tears to your eyes and you realize God would never speak to me like that. God does not think that about me. That is not what God wants me to hold in my heart. So it's not this big, profound practice, but it's just a matter of recognizing the source of that voice and then getting the content of it in front of us so that we can realize this is not serving me.
That's life-changing. I've been going through the book, The Artist's Way. Have you gone through it? So I went through it a couple years ago, but I kind of felt like I was in a place in my life where I wanted to redo it again. And so for the past 5 weeks, I've been doing that. And part of the practice of The Artist's Way is doing morning pages.
The morning pages.
And it's very similar, right? Because you're writing down and it's just like train of thought off the top of your head, stream of consciousness. And you write 3 pages of whatever you want to write. But it's the first thing you do that day. And it's very similar to hear those thoughts that are coming out and the condemnation or the shame and to recognize it. So I just think
absolutely
becoming aware of that voice can change our lives.
That's such a valuable practice.
Ways.
Yeah. And even the, I was going to say about the morning pages is also, that's the practice of tending, right? It's tending to your interior world. Because sometimes tending is exterior, right? It's something we're doing with our hands, but tending can also be tending to our interior world. And that's that morning pages practice is a tending to the interior world. And then we're seeing what's actually in there.
Totally. And it's shocking
sometimes. It is shocking. Yes. Yeah.
Can you talk to me a little bit? So I've been really focusing on this idea of surrender. Because surrender has always been a really uncomfortable word for me.
Yeah.
Because I thought I can control my external circumstances. I can make things happen. And surrender always seemed like a very weak concept to me up until recently when I recognized that it is in letting go that we really, truly have a sense of regaining our power. And so what does the word surrender mean to you? Like, how has that been important or not important or comfortable or uncomfortable for you?
Oh, it's great. And it is, it can feel like a giving up, right? That sometimes we associate giving up.
It's like a resignation.
Resignation.
Right? Like
yeah.
throwing my hands in the air.
Exactly. Instead of a realization that when we are weak, we are strong. And here's what I mean by that. Immediately when you ask me that question, I think of the first step of the 12 steps of AA. That's exactly where I go. That we realized we were powerless and we needed help. That's essentially what it's saying. And if you have ever in your life experienced a powerlessness against something, for me, like I'll give the example of anxiety. Living in a situation where I was dealing with significant anxiety and I couldn't control it. If you're a doer and a high capacity, high functioning person, you can kind of pull your bootstraps up and you can kind of make a lot of things happen in life. And then all of a sudden, and for some of us, this happens when we're 20. For some of us, it takes longer, right? All of a sudden, we're like, I am drowning. And there's no energy, there's no skill, there's no strategy that I can employ that will get me through this. I have to open my hands up and let go. And the first step in regaining our strength is admitting that we need help, admitting that we are powerless. And that to me is the crux of surrender. And I love that idea of, God, it's all yours. I say that to God like a lot of times during the day. God, it's all yours. It's all yours because I can be really strong and really hardworking, and I can be skilled even. And there are things in my life to this very moment that are completely beyond my capacity. God, it's all yours. And that is where things start to change, where strength comes in, because all of a sudden I've said, I'm at my limit. I've hit my limit. I'm a human. I need the divine power of God. And that's when the magic starts happening in our lives. And it doesn't even necessarily mean that our circumstances change, but I have found for myself that all of a sudden I have space in my chest, that I am not living, because there's potential that isn't all up to me. Life is no longer all up to me. I've learned every bit of this the hard way. Every bit of this
Doesn't that
is
suck about life
it totally
a little
sucks.
bit? Like all the best lessons you have to learn the hard way.
It totally sucks. I want to go back to this surrender thing really quick.
Yeah.
Of course we learn it the hard way. We learn it because we're like vice gripped on our own lives, like death grip, white knuckling, and then all of a sudden we realize I haven't even taken a breath in like 3 days. My shoulders are like up to my ears. I might want to think about like, is this really a great strategy for living? There's a spiritual director that I know, and this is on the topic of surrender, because sometimes that's a great word or a great idea or a great concept. Oh yeah, surrender. But she gives this image and I love it and it's helped me. You're standing on the dock and there's a beautiful river flowing by and you have in your hands this thing that you can't let go of. It's your marriage, it's your child, it's your future. It's something small or big that you do not want God to touch, take away from you, look at, and you know you need to surrender it. You know you need to let go of it. And she said there's a raft and you put that thing on the raft, that child, that marriage, that situation that you in your own power cannot resolve, and you send it down the river, and God is at the other end, ready to catch it. And you are safe on the dock, and he is safely going to receive that thing, but you are sending it away from yourself for his care. And there's something about that I think is gentle and also like an action, right? That we can like, even in our imagination, close our eyes and think about, I'm going to send this down the river to God. I got to send it down the river.
I love just that imagery. And I think it's such a useful technique to just sit there for a moment and think about what it is we need to put in that raft. Ooh. Okay, I'm going to do that tonight. I'm on it. Best part of your book, although there's a million of them, but I'm reading through, it's late at night, and I read the chapter about the summer of making love to myself. So good. I was like cheering. I'm like, yeah.
Yes, totally.
Okay, you have to tell everybody where this came from.
Well, yeah, it's, the part of the book that people will either really get or be really uncomfortable with. Okay, great.
You were saying there are some people who are like, take that chapter out.
There's a couple people that read early drafts of the book and they were like, you have to take that out. That's so uncomfortable. And I'm like, I don't know. I think, yes, it's uncomfortable a little bit. The idea of the summer of making love to myself. I mean, yeah, that's super uncomfortable. But it also says something really significant and it broke through something in me. And I'll give you a little context. Last summer, I was in some really tight circumstances. My husband had been gone traveling for months for work, and I have had the 3 kids at home, and it was just difficult. It was just a difficult season, and I was kind of not to use this word again, but I just felt like I was underwater. I was drowning a little bit, and so I see a spiritual director at least once a month, and I went and saw her, and I sat down with her. And she said, Leeana, we're just going to declare, and I was explaining, I'm kind of just, this is hard and I'm failing and there's so many other women that could be doing this so much better than I can. And I just feel like my kids are going to have all these memories of their mom stressed out, right? And putting herself in timeout because she can't cope. And she said, instead of like going right into that place, she just flipped it. And she just out of the blue said, we're going to declare this summer heretofore as a summer of making love to yourself. And I was like, I was quiet for like a few seconds. And I was like, that's awkward. That's really awkward. Okay, I don't know exactly what you mean by that.
Your husband is out of town.
I know, so. And that's right. And I'm like, what exactly is she getting at here? And I don't even know that I want to ask, right? Like, I'm not sure I really want to know. But then she explained herself and she said, this is a summer to treat yourself with extreme gentleness, kindness, nurturing, care. And I got it. I got that. So every time you want to push back against yourself and expect more from yourself, take on a totally different posture. of love and kindness and acceptance and nurturing and care for yourself. And again, talk about a counterintuitive practice. So that was last summer. And
was it a revolutionary summer?
It was. It was. And, I think as women, we think of self-care or care, kindness, self-compassion is like, I need to go get one more pedicure, or I need like a spa day. And certainly that can be part of it, right? I think there's something really powerful about people touching us and all of that. Mm-hmm. But I think it wasn't pampering. It wasn't about pampering. It was about a different kind of practice toward myself.
Like a posture of gentleness.
Exactly. And so every time I wanted to push harder, every time I wanted to expect more, I said, I have to begin again. I have to back out of that because that's getting me nowhere. And I think sometimes we think we can bully ourselves into better behavior. We can bully ourselves into being more or making it all look better. And it never gets us anywhere. It never gets us, all it gets us is stuck and sad. And so that idea of making love to yourself is like, this is gonna create some energy that bullying yourself never will. You're not gonna have sustained transformation by being hard on yourself. And so little things like even I decided I would order groceries in. That's just one small
Brilliant.
thing. Like, okay, so I have to pay the $5 tip to have the groceries delivered to my door.
But it saves you a freaking...
It was huge.
Yeah.
It was
hours at the grocery store.
Huge.
Yeah.
I saved money actually because I'm not just like rifling things into my cart. One of my least favorite things to do is to take my children into a store with me, right?
Yes.
And so it would save just everyone's sanity. Mm-hmm. And I could do some meal planning and then get some snacks. And I said, you know what? It's okay. This is actually like, how would I treat, this is another helpful posture. How would I treat a dear friend who was going through this? If a dear friend's husband was gone and she was in the trenches with 3 little kids and she was going through a lot and she had deadlines and a lot of pressure and just felt generally stressed, would I be like, oh man, it's hard to believe how much of a failure you are. Like, have you even counted how many times you've asked for prayer this month? Like would I say that to her? No, I'd say, Mandy, this is tough. Mm-hmm. And I see you and you're doing it. And life isn't easy. And I'm here. So part of the summer of making love to myself was turning toward myself in the way that I would my dear friends.
Okay. One of my favorite questions to ask my friends is, what is the best advice you never got?
Well, this dovetails perfectly with what we were just talking about. The best advice I never got is to light the anthropology candle.
So good.
And this
Light
is
the fancy candle.
Yes. This is exactly, if you were coming to my house for coffee, I would know how you like your coffee, hopefully, and I would have your coffee ready for you. And I always believe in hydrating and caffeinating in equal amounts, right? So I would know, do you like sparkling water or still water with ice, or how, and I'd have it ready for you. And maybe I'd have one of my faux fur blankets. It's really cozy. Assuming it wasn't like an 87-degree morning in San Diego. And I'd have a little nest for you and have it ready. And I'd get out the expensive anthropology candle and I'd light it. The one that costs like $6 a minute to burn, right? And I would never do that for myself. And this last summer when I was, the winter when I was writing Begin Again and it was dark and I was up, I'd make myself that nest. I'd get the water that I'd like. I'd make my coffee how I like it. I'd get the blanket that I like. And every single morning I'd light the anthropology candle as a way to honor myself and my offering, and also a way to say, you're worth it. And it's a pleasure. That candle is a freaking pleasure. And I don't want to just save that for the people I love. I want to show myself, it's like a sign to myself that you're worth it.
I love it. What's your go-to fragrance?
Volcano.
Hello. Obviously.
Hello. And I love it in the mercury glass container, but I found it recently on sale somewhere. And the container is hot pink, and that's my favorite color. And so I just, I might even overburn it. I can't say for sure, but you have to have a budget line for this, but it's worth it.
Absolutely.
It's worth it, especially in certain seasons. Other seasons, maybe that's not the thing, but the best advice I never got was to light the anthropology candle.
Love it. Are you going to get a tattoo for your new book?
Ooh, great question. Sure. Do you think I should?
I totally think you should.
Yeah.
I feel like you have to commemorate it, right?
I have a dear friend who may or may not be sitting in the room right now, who has Always We Begin Again in my handwriting tattooed on her forearm.
Can I see? Oh my gosh, that is gorgeous.
In purple ink. That's her favorite color.
Love it.
So I don't know. Maybe it's in my future, Mandy.
You guys should get matching tattoos.
I know. I feel like every woman should have that phrase tattooed on their body.
I 100% agree. I actually, after reading your book, I was thinking about it because it's like that reminder we all need on a moment by moment basis.
Yes. Yeah. That it's like his mercies are new. Not just every morning, but like every other
moment.
second. Yes, every moment. Yes.
How has having that tattoo changed you?
Yeah, I mean, I just think, I'm going to scooch this over. Oh my God. Yeah, I just think listening to Leeana talk about these ideas for a long time, it just has offered me this constant reminder of like, this is what we're working on right now. We're working on beginning again, and this idea of not seeing things as a failure because we're trying again. Like we're in the same spot, we're struggling with the same feelings again, we're struggling with the same issues again, but it's fine because this is what it means to be a person, that there's this constant trying again. And yeah, it's very meaningful to me to have it on my arm, to have her writing on my arm because she's so dear to me, and feel like she's leading me in her process with her. We're just sort of going along together in that journey. And yeah, it's been really healthy for me.
Love that.
And if you're in San Diego and want to talk to somebody, check out the Soul Care House.
That's right. That's right. Amen.
Where is the Soul Care House located? Seriously. if
It's in
someone
Mission
wants
Hills,
Okay.
Central San Diego. And Elaine has an incredible team of therapists that I've known and have loved for years. So if you need some help in a specific area of your life or just generally.
Or decorating your house.
Or
because
I know,
Elaine's house
I
is
know,
like
Elaine's
on
house.
point.
Yes. Elaine's house is like the anthropology candle.
Yes, it totally is.
Yeah. Yeah. I think too, this idea of beginning again for some people can just seem like a maze that never goes anywhere. And it's just this endless cycle that is just like it doesn't ever take us anywhere. And I think that I've heard that from, well, that just feels kind of like, I don't know, like I'm not going anywhere. I'm not moving forward in my life, right? Because we really need to move forward in our lives. And what I've seen is that this practice over time, in fact, it takes us deeper up and deeper in, right? I think that's a C.S. Lewis phrase, that it spirals us into a deeper part of ourselves and a deeper part of God. And maybe we can't see ourselves climbing a ladder so much, but this beginning again, it spirals us into a deeper part of ourselves. And so I don't think it's just this kind of endless cycle. I think the practice of it does something significant in our souls. I just wanted to say that to the person who might think, well, this is just kind of like repetition for the sake of repetition.
Hey, thanks so much for listening today. I have some live podcast events happening around the country where I'm going to be inviting you to show up to a secret location to be part of the recording and to help me interview. So follow me on Instagram and Facebook where I will be sharing all the details. Now go out and have more fun and don't come back until you do.